Hello and welcome. You are listening to Architecture Topics. I'm your host, Liam Karen, and today we are going to travel back to the loud, chaotic, imperial capital of 1st century Europe, ancient Rome. We are going to talk about a building that promised the people blood, thunder, and free lunch. Literally. This episode is all about the Colosseum. But before we get there, like always, I want to invite you to press pause right now and go follow Architecture Topics on whichever platform you are listening. It might not seem like it matters, but it does. So go hit that subscribe button and let's dive right into today's story. All right, let's go back to the year 70 AD, or in other words, 70 years after the birth of Christ. Just a couple years earlier, the Roman Empire had come dangerously close to collapse. Nero, the last emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, had committed suicide after losing control of the city. His death plunged Rome into a violent power struggle, a period now known as the Year of the Four Emperors. In the span of just 12 months, 4 different men claimed the throne. There were revolts, assassinations, and open civil war. The Roman people had seen their capital burn, their rulers fall, and their future thrown into doubt. That's the world that Vespasian inherited. Vespasian wasn't born into privilege. No noble blood or glamorous origin myth. He was a military man from a provincial family in central Italy. Rough around the edges, but respected. And more importantly, he understood people. He understood what the Roman people wanted. Stability, yes, but also a sense of dignity. A sense that they hadn't just traded one corrupt ruler for another. So he started by rebuilding that trust, not just with words, but with concrete and stone. His most symbolic move was to strike directly at the memory of Nero, not through condemnation, but through replacement. Nero had built himself a palace at the heart of Rome, the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. It stretched across hills, gardens, and even included an artificial lake. It wasn't a home. It was a fantasy land, carved out of the public city for one man's pleasure. And the people had hated it. So Vespasian drained the lake. And right there, in the cleared basin where water once shimmered for Nero's private use, he imagined a public amphitheater, a place for shows, for laughter, for violence, a place for the people. It would be the largest amphitheater ever built in the Roman world. Now, if you're picturing one-star architect sketching up heroic plans, forget it. This wasn't a signature building in the modern sense. We don't actually know who designed the Colosseum. No name was carved into marble. No scrolls survived. And that's telling. This was a public project, not a personal one, commissioned by the emperor, funded with war spoils, likely from the brutal siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and built by teams of anonymous engineers, craftsmen, and tens of thousands of enslaved workers. It wasn't about artistic authorship. It was about delivering something fast, monumental, and unforgettable. The design itself was revolutionary. Earlier Roman amphitheaters were often built into hillsides, using the slope to support the seating. But not here. This was central Rome. Flat ground. No natural support. So the Colosseum had to be freestanding, held up entirely by a network of concrete vaults, travertine piers, and brick-faced corridors. The shape chosen was a perfect ellipse, about 189 meters long and 156 meters wide. For those thinking in feet, that's roughly 620 by 513. The arena floor alone was over 80 meters long, which makes it longer than an American football field. And at full capacity, the Colosseum could hold somewhere between 50,000 and 80,000 spectators. From the outside, it rose in 4 distinct levels. The lower 3 were constructed with rows of arches framed by half columns in 3 classical styles: Doric on the ground floor, Ionic above, and Corinthian at the top. A visual rhythm that went from strength to refinement. Above those arches was a solid attic wall, pierced with small windows and anchor points for a massive canvas covering, called the velarium. The velarium worked like a giant sail, stretched out by sailors with ropes and pulleys, and could be pulled over the seating to shade the crowd from the harsh Roman sun. Seating was strictly hierarchical. Senators had their names carved into the marble benches up front, wealthy male citizens next, then ordinary male citizens, then the urban poor, and finally, up in the wooden gallery under the awning's edge, women and enslaved people. Every detail was designed to control the crowd. 80 numbered entrances and a carefully calibrated flow of movement. You didn't just wander in and find a seat. You were funneled, assigned, and seated according to your place in Roman society. It wasn't just a stadium. It was a mirror of the empire itself. Building something this massive in the middle of a city on flat land with ancient tools was no small feat. Work began around 72 AD, and it moved fast. The first phase, under Vespasian, laid the foundations and brought the outer shell to life. His son Titus would finish the structure and inaugurate it in 80 AD with one of the most extravagant public events in Roman history. And a few years later, Vespasian's younger son, Domitian, would add the finishing touches, especially to the underground levels. The main structure was made from travertine, a pale, durable limestone quarried about 30 kilometers from Rome in Tivoli. The blocks were fitted together with precision and held in place not with mortar, but with iron clamps. Thousands of them. Centuries later, people would pry those clamps out to melt the metal, leaving behind the pockmarked surface we still see today. Inside, they used a mix of concrete and brick, lighter materials that allowed them to form the intricate vaulted corridors and staircases that supported the seating above. And they had manpower, massive manpower. The labor force behind the Colosseum included Roman builders and craftsmen, of course, but also tens of thousands of enslaved people, many of them prisoners of war brought back from Judea after the Roman siege of Jerusalem. They quarried stone, mixed lime, stacked bricks, hauled timber, and poured concrete under the Roman sun. There were no cranes, no motors, just scaffolding, pulleys, winches, and sheer human effort. Yet, within just 8 years, the Colosseum was ready to open its doors. Let's put this into perspective. A project of nearly unimaginable scale at the time was built in less time than it takes most modern stadiums to get through permitting. When the Colosseum opened in the year 80 AD, Rome threw a party like no other. Titus, now emperor after his father Vespasian's death, inaugurated the amphitheater with 100 days of games, one after another, day after day. An unrelenting display of imperial power and public generosity. There were gladiator fights, of course, but also wild animal hunts, public executions, theatrical dramas based on mythology, often ending with very real death, and even naval battles. In the early years, before the underground tunnels were added, the Romans could flood the arena and stage mock sea battles, called naumachia. Crews fought on scaled-down ships, reenacting famous naval victories right in the heart of the city. It wasn't just a stunt. It was a show of control over water, engineering, and human life. The arena became a stage where violence was choreographed, ritualized, and served up as entertainment. The sand wasn't just to soften falls. It was to soak up blood. The Romans had a word for this, munera, which translates as offerings. These games were framed as gifts from the emperor to the people. But they were never just gifts. They were carefully calculated performances of power, and they were free. Admission cost nothing. Food was often handed out. Bread, olives, dates, sometimes even meat or wine. The velarium overhead shaded the audience. Water fountains kept them refreshed. It was all part of the same logic. Bread and circuses. The idea was simple. Keep the people fed and entertained, and they won't ask too many questions. But the Colosseum wasn't just about distracting the masses. It also reinforced the hierarchy of Roman life, a way to remind everyone who they were and where they stood. And while some of the events may sound barbaric to us now, for the Romans they carried meaning. Gladiators weren't just fighters. They were symbols of courage, skill, and fatalism. Many were enslaved or condemned criminals, but others were volunteers chasing fame and prize money. They trained in special schools, became celebrities, and sometimes even earned their freedom. Exotic animals, including lions, elephants, bears, and crocodiles, were brought in from across the empire, caged beneath the arena floor, and released in elaborate hunts. These weren't just spectacles. They were statements, and the message was clear. Rome can command the beasts of Africa and Asia. The empire is vast, and it bends nature to its will. Everything about the Colosseum reminded Romans that they were citizens of an empire that was the master of the known world. And the Colosseum itself, standing there in stone and concrete, was proof. The Colosseum was active for centuries. Games were held well into the 5th century AD, though by then, the empire was in decline, and the spectacles were fewer, smaller, and less extravagant. Eventually, the funding dried up. Gladiators fell out of fashion, and Christianity, now the official religion of the empire, frowned on blood sports. The last recorded games took place sometime in the 400s. After that, the Colosseum began its second life, not as a monument, but as a quarry. The structure was too massive to ignore and too tempting not to reuse. So stones began being hauled away for other buildings, and iron clamps were ripped out and melted down. Entire sections collapsed after earthquakes, and by the Middle Ages, much of the outer ring was gone. And the interior had become a strange urban patchwork, home to workshops, stables, and even some housing. In the 13th century, a powerful Roman family, the Frangipani, took it over and turned it into a fortress. And a few centuries after that, popes began stripping its marble for new churches and palaces, including, famously, St. Peter's Basilica. But even in its broken state, the Colosseum never disappeared. By the 18th century, it had yet again become something else, this time a symbol of Christian martyrdom. Pilgrims believed early Christians had died there, and the Pope declared it a sacred site. A cross was installed, and the structure was reframed not as a ruin of pagan entertainment, but as a place of sacrifice and suffering. That wasn't historically accurate. There's no solid evidence that Christians were executed in the Colosseum, but the legend stuck, and it helped preserve the building. Restoration efforts began, Romantic painters came to sketch it, poets wrote odes to its shattered grandeur, and by the 19th and 20th centuries, the Colosseum had become something new. Again, this time a national symbol. It appeared on postcards, coins, stamps. Mussolini marched under its arches. Tourists came by the millions, and slowly it became a shorthand for Rome itself. Today, the Colosseum stands as one of the most recognizable structures in the world. It's not whole. Large portions are missing, and the arena floor is long gone. But somehow, that makes it more powerful. It wears its damage like memory. Each crack, each missing stone, a reminder of time, survival, and reinvention. Architecturally, it's been endlessly copied and adapted. Its elliptical form and tiered seating became the model for stadiums across Europe, and the Americas. You can see echoes of it everywhere. From the Yankee Stadium to the Olympic arenas of the 20th century. Politically, it's been used and reused. Roman emperors used it to project imperial power. Renaissance popes mined it for marble. Fascist leaders posed in front of it to link themselves to ancient glory. And today, it's lit up in gold to protest the death penalty, or in red for persecuted Christians. It's still a symbol. No one can deny that. But now, what it symbolizes depends on who's looking. For some, it's a monument to engineering genius. For others, a cautionary tale about power, violence, and control. And for many, it's simply the heart of Rome. And that's probably one of the most remarkable things about it. The Colosseum has outlived the empire that built it, outlived the emperors who paid for it, outlived the games, the religions, the ideologies. And still, it speaks, not in marble inscriptions, but in space and shadow. It asks us what we celebrate, what we remember, what we forget, what kind of audience we are, and what kind we want to be. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you for listening to Architecture Topics. If you enjoyed today's episode, consider following the show and sharing it with a friend. It's the best way to help more people discover these fascinating stories. I'm Liam Karen, and I'll see you on the next one. Until then, take care and keep looking up.